In the previous lecture, I mentioned we didn't really track the parent and child relationship. I don't think I explained that very well, so I'm going to go ahead and explain that one now. What I'm going to do is jump over to my terminal and we're going to run that one again with just yarn ts node index.ts and see what we get logged. You can see we're doing this insert function here and we're inserting the correct parent to the child. In the first case, we're creating a text node and then we're attempting to insert that into the PDF text element, which is exactly what we see over here. And this is working as expected. However, we're not actually setting up the relationship between the parent and the child. All we're doing is console logging it. If we jump over to the source code for the Vue 3 renderer, we can see how they handle it over there. That's going to be in this node operation inside the insert, and they're saying parent.insertBefore, which is a DOM API, and they're inserting the child. And this is going to implicitly and automatically set up this relationship. If you have a child, you can easily find the parent and vice versa. And that's not something we're going to get for free when we're using our renderer as PDFKit. We're going to have to find some way to track this. Before we do this, I'd like to show you one other thing, and that's how you can access the virtual DOM to have a look around. I'm going to assign the value of this to VM, and I'm just going to jump in here and do a log on console.dollar, which is the private instance.subtree, and this is going to be the VDOM. This is not really something you'd want to be using when you're building applications because it's kind of a private API, but it is nice to see how it looks and how it might work and how it can work for us. So you can see here we're getting the VDOM for our very basic first render. We have the top level view that has an array of children. Inside of that we have this text element. We can see the element down here is a PDF text element, and if you continue recursing down you can get to more and more children. The one problem we're going to have here is there's no way to get the parent. If you have this node here in isolation and you don't know the parent, there's no way to get it. Of course, if you're using something like web APIs, like the DOM APIs, there is the parent attribute you can use, but we haven't got that for our PDF renderer at all. And it looks like here, the attributes we have are not going to give us any way to access the parent. Other than that, this is a very complex virtual DOM for Vue's many features. The PDF renderer we're going to build is very simple, and we don't need most of these features. So what we're going to do is create our own very simple structure, which is designed specially for building our renderer, and it's going to be much more simple. So let's go ahead and do that and make sure we're correctly tracking the parent and child relationships. The first thing we're going to need to do is update our interfaces to actually support parent and children. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say any node can have parent. I'm just going to make it optional for now, and that is going to be a string. We could make this an element, so something like PDF elements, but that's not what I want to do. What I'd rather do is track it by a string, just using the ID, and we're going to see why this is beneficial in just a moment. The other thing we're going to need to declare is children, and any kind of node can have children as well. So let's go ahead and just define that one here. Children is exactly the same. It's going to be not optional. It's going to be an array, and that's going to be an array of strings as opposed to an array of elements. And we're going to talk about why I'm using strings, which are going to be IDs, as opposed to elements in just a moment. Now that we've updated those, let's go ahead and update our insert node operation and make sure we're tracking those relationships. What we want to do is make sure we're assigning the parent to the child and vice versa as well. And we're also going to keep track of these in our own data structure. That's just going to be a very simple key value pair. I'm going to call it node map. It's going to be a record type where we're mapping string, and we're going to map that to either PDF node, PDF nodes, or PDF elements. So it can contain any of the elements we have created so far. Let's now go ahead and make sure we're updating the node map data structure. So the first thing I'm going to do is check in here, and we're going to say if not, and then we're going to say if child.id in node map. And that means it hasn't been inserted into the node map yet. Every single element is going to be the child of something at some point, except for the very root node, so it's going to be inserted to the node map at some point. I can just go ahead and say node map child.id is going to be equal to child. We do need to have some special logic for the very root node, the PDF document element, because that's not going to be the child of anything. So let's go ahead and add that one as well. I'm going to say if child, or actually if parent is an instance of the PDF element, or PDF document element rather, is more correct. And if it is, we're going to do it exactly the same thing. What I'm going to do is to have an easy way to track the root element, I'm going to change the ID. We're going to make the ID root, and that's going to be much easier to track. Let's go ahead now and just say parent.id is equal to root as well. Now that we're inserting those to the node ops or the node map correctly, let's actually go ahead and try it out and see what's happening. I'm going to jump down to the bottom here and just do a console log on the node map and see what we're getting. Let's head back to our terminal and run yarn ts node index.ts, and we are getting a very large log here. It is attaching this view app kind of private property to the very top level element, and the top level element of course is going to be that root element. However, if we look at the rest of them, we're getting very simple data structures here. We're getting our PDF view element. It has the correct ID. It has no children because we're not setting up the relationship yet, but this is what we were expecting. I'm not really interested in this vNode here, so I'm just going to ignore it for now, and exactly the same thing with this view app metadata as well. So the next thing we need to do is make sure we're assigning the children to the array correctly, and as I mentioned earlier, we'd like to track the parent somehow as well, so we're going to have to make sure we assign that one. Let's head up to our insert function and make sure we're assigning everything correctly. So the first thing we're going to do is assign the children. All I'm going to do is say parent.children.push, and we're going to push in the ID as opposed to actual reference to the element. So I'm going to say child.id. We're then going to have the inverse relationship. We're going to say child.parent is equal to parent.id, and that should be all we need to do. Let's go ahead, save it off, and try it out again. And if everything has been done correctly, we should expect to see the parent and child attributes correctly populated. If we scroll up here, we can see they are indeed populated, and it looks like everything is exactly how it hopefully should be. It's a little bit confusing. What I'm actually going to do is clear that one, run it again, and just scroll up a little bit so it's obvious which one we're looking at. Let's go ahead and run that one more time, and this should hopefully give us a bit of a better idea. So if we scroll up a little bit, we can see we are starting here, and we are getting those two warnings again. We're creating our elements, and then we're doing the insert. Where is our final tree? It starts around here. So you can see here we're getting our text node, which is some text. The ID is 3838, and the parent is going to be 5180, and that should be a view if that's done. Everything is done correctly. Let's go ahead and find 5180. Here it is. It is the text element, which is actually what it should be, the text element. I mistakenly said view element, and its ID is 5180. Its child is 3883, which is exactly what we expected, and we have the parent of 4428. That is going to be the view element, which is exactly what we expected, and that one's parent is going to be root, and as we said, the root is going to be PDF document element, so that is all working exactly as expected. We have created our own very simple data structure, and this is going to be very useful for when we go to render to our PDF, and that's what we're going to be doing in the next lecture.